there is a woman listening to this right now who has smiled in rooms where her soul was bleeding. A woman who carried entire storms in silence while the people around her accused her of being too emotional, too distant, too difficult, when the truth was far more painful. They did not see the nights she fought battles in her mind just to survive another morning. They did not see the tears she wiped away before answering the phone with a steady voice. They did not see the way she begged God in private while pretending to be strong in public. And now something inside her is changing. Not because the world suddenly became kind, not because the people who hurt her finally apologized, but because God is awakening a strength inside her that pain could not destroy. Listen carefully, because this message is not for the woman who needs applause to keep going. This is for the woman who rebuilt herself in silence while nobody came to save her. You know what breaks many people? It is not betrayal by strangers. It is betrayal by people they prayed for, people they defended, people they loved without calculation. That is the kind of wound that shakes the soul. And some of you know exactly what that feels like. You gave loyalty to people who repaid you with manipulation. You opened your heart to people who studied your softness like a weakness. You trusted voices that later became accusations against you. And the hardest part was not even losing them. The hardest part was realizing they were comfortable watching you suffer. That realization changes a person forever. It changes the way they enter rooms. It changes the way they trust. It changes the way they sleep at night. But hear me clearly. God did not allow your heartbreak to destroy you. He allowed it to reveal who was never truly standing with you. There are women who were built in comfort, and there are women who were built in fire. The woman who rebuilds herself alone belongs to the second category. She did not become strong because life was easy. She became strong because life kept demanding more from her than she thought she could survive. She learned how to hold herself together while her world collapsed in front of her. She learned how to keep functioning while her spirit was exhausted. She learned how to carry grief without becoming bitter. And some people misunderstood her transformation. They called her guarded. They called her cold. But they never asked what happened to her. Nobody asks the ocean why it became deep after surviving storms. There were moments when you almost disappeared emotionally. Moments when you sat alone, trying to understand how people who once promised to protect you became the source of your pain. You replayed conversations in your head. You questioned yourself. You wondered if you were the problem. That is what emotional attack does. It confuses the victim until she begins to distrust her own heart. But God sees clearly even when people twist narratives against you. God knows the tears you never explained. God knows the manipulation you endured in silence. Say, ah. God knows the pressure you carried while trying to keep everyone else comfortable. And there comes a moment when heaven itself begins rebuilding the woman that people tried to break. Do you understand how dangerous a healed woman becomes? Not dangerous in cruelty, dangerous in clarity, dangerous in wisdom, dangerous in discernment. Once a woman has cried enough tears alone, she stops begging for validation from people who cannot see her value. Once she has survived abandonment, she no longer fears being alone. Once she has rebuilt herself from emotional ashes, she becomes impossible to control. That is why some people panic when they feel you pulling away. They were comfortable with the broken version of you because broken people are easier to manipulate. But the woman God is rebuilding now cannot be ruled by fear anymore. You survived things that should have destroyed your confidence completely. You survived people speaking against your name. You survived rejection from places where you expected love. You survived emotional exhaustion so deep that some mornings you woke up already tired, yet somehow you are still here. Think about that. After everything that tried to silence you, you are still breathing. After every betrayal that tried to harden your heart permanently, you are still capable of feeling. That is not weakness. That is evidence that God preserved something sacred inside you while the world was trying to crush it. Some women spend years trying to prove their worth to people who already decided to misunderstand them. Stop doing that. Stop draining your spirit, trying to convince blind people to see your heart. Not everybody deserves access to your vulnerability. Not everybody deserves explanations. Some people made you feel guilty simply because you started protecting your peace. But protecting your peace is not selfish when your soul has already survived war. There is a difference between isolation and wisdom. The strong woman who rebuilds herself alone learns that difference slowly, painfully, but permanently. You know what nobody talks about? The loneliness of becoming stronger. The loneliness of realizing you have outgrown environments that once felt familiar. The loneliness of sitting in rooms full of people and still feeling emotionally unseen. Growth is painful because it separates you from versions of yourself that once tolerated disrespect just to avoid abandonment. And when you stop tolerating what damages your spirit, people who benefited from your silence suddenly call you difficult. Let them talk. They were comfortable when you were shrinking yourself to make them comfortable. They became unsettled the moment you remembered your worth before God. There is a kind of exhaustion that sleep cannot fix. It comes from constantly carrying emotional burdens nobody acknowledges. It comes from always being the strong one while secretly falling apart inside. Some women listening to this have mastered the art of looking okay while feeling shattered internally. They laugh while grieving. They encourage others while quietly questioning whether anyone notices their own pain. But hear this with your entire soul. God has not ignored your silent endurance. Every lonely night, every silent breakdown, every prayer whispered through tears. None of it was unseen. The woman rebuilding herself alone often feels forgotten by the world. While others receive support systems, she learns survival. While others are carried emotionally, she teaches herself how to stand without reassurance. That process is brutal. It forces a woman to meet parts of herself she never knew existed. It forces her to confront fear directly. It forces her to discover whether her strength depends on people or on God. And though the process wounds her deeply, it also transforms her into someone unshakable. You cannot intimidate a woman who already survived emotional devastation alone. You cannot threaten someone who has already lost what she feared losing most. Some of you became fearless because life removed your illusions. You realized that people can promise forever and still walk away. You realized that loyalty is rare. You realized that appearances deceive. But you also realized something greater. God remained constant while everything else shifted. And that realization changes the entire structure of a person's soul. There are women who spend years apologizing for their strength because society becomes uncomfortable around women who no longer tolerate disrespect. But your strength is not the problem. The problem is that people became accustomed to benefiting from your weakness. The moment you stopped over-explaining yourself, they called you distant. The moment you stopped begging for love, they called you prideful. The moment you stopped accepting emotional crumbs, they accused you of changing. Yes, you changed. Pain changed you. Wisdom changed you. God changed you. Some wounds never fully disappear, but they stop controlling you. That is the difference healing creates. Healing does not erase memory. Healing changes your relationship with the memory. There was a time when certain names could break your spirit instantly. There was a time when certain betrayals replayed in your mind endlessly. But now God is teaching you how to carry your story without letting it poison your future. You are learning that survival itself is sacred. The woman rebuilding herself alone becomes deeply aware of energy. She notices manipulation faster. She notices insincerity faster. She notices emotional inconsistency faster. Pain sharpened her discernment. That is why she no longer rushes to trust words alone. She watches patterns. She watches behavior. She watches how people act when they no longer need something from her. Some call her overly cautious now, but they do not understand what it cost her to regain peace after emotional destruction. There were nights when you thought about giving up emotionally. Nights when disappointment sat so heavily on your chest that even hope felt exhausting. But somehow God kept whispering strength into your spirit when nobody else knew you needed it. Somehow you kept getting back up. And one day you will realize that your survival was never accidental. God was preparing you to become living proof that brokenness does not have the final word. Do not be ashamed of the season where you disappeared to heal. The world celebrates performance but rarely respects recovery. Yet recovery is holy work. It takes courage to rebuild a shattered spirit. It takes courage to confront pain instead of numbing it. It takes courage to walk away from people who constantly wounded your peace. And many women delayed their healing because they feared being alone. But eventually they discovered something powerful. Solitude with God is safer than company with people who slowly destroy your soul. Some of you had to mother yourselves emotionally because the people who should have protected you failed you. You became your own comfort, your own reassurance, your own rescue. That creates a different kind of strength, a quieter strength, a deeper strength. You stop expecting the world to carry you because life taught you how to carry yourself. Yet even in that independence, there were moments when your heart still longed for genuine love. That longing does not make you weak. It makes you human. The strong woman who rebuilds herself alone is often misunderstood because people only see the final version of her. They see confidence, but not the years of confusion. They see boundaries, but not the betrayals that created them. They see resilience, but not the nights she cried herself to sleep. They see wisdom, but not the suffering that taught it. Nobody sees the invisible wars behind a transformed soul. There comes a point where pain either destroys your identity or deepens your purpose. Some women became addicted to bitterness after betrayal, but others allowed God to refine them through suffering instead of corrupting them through hatred. That is the woman this message is speaking to. The woman who refused to let cruelty turn her cruel. The woman who stayed compassionate even after life gave her reasons to become cold. The woman who kept praying even while carrying disappointment. You were never weak for loving deeply. Do not let betrayal convince you otherwise. The fact that someone mishandled your heart does not reduce the value of your heart. Some people encounter loyalty and still choose deception because dysfunction is all they know. Their inability to value you says more about them than it says about you. Stop internalizing the failures of broken people. The rebuilding process is humiliating sometimes. Nobody talks about that part. Starting over emotionally feels humiliating. Admitting you trusted the wrong people feels humiliating. Watching people move on while you are still healing feels humiliating. But God often rebuilds people in hidden places before revealing their strength publicly. Seeds grow underground before anyone sees evidence of life. There is a reason your spirit no longer tolerates environments that once felt normal. You have changed internally. What once entertained you now drains you. What once felt acceptable now feels heavy. God is teaching you discernment through discomfort. Pay attention to what disturbs your peace repeatedly. Not every invitation deserves your presence. Not every relationship deserves your loyalty. Not every voice deserves access to your mind. A woman who rebuilds herself alone learns how to survive disappointment without collapsing. She learns how to sit with grief without letting it define her permanently. She learns how to continue forward even when closure never arrives. That is real strength. Not pretending nothing hurts, not performing perfection. Real strength is carrying pain without surrendering your soul to darkness. Some people thought your silence meant weakness. They mistook your patience for passivity. They mistook your kindness for naivety. But there is something they fail to understand. Quiet women are often carrying the loudest spiritual power. You stopped arguing because you realized not every battle deserves your energy. You stopped explaining because truth does not need endless defense. You stopped chasing because God showed you that what belongs in your life will not require you to abandon your dignity. The world often glorifies loud confidence, but there is another kind of power that grows in private suffering. It is the power of a woman who learns how to survive emotional devastation without losing her connection to God. That kind of woman becomes spiritually dangerous to negativity because her strength was not built through comfort. It was built through endurance. You know what happens when a woman spends years rebuilding herself alone? She develops depth that superficial people cannot comprehend. She becomes emotionally intelligent because pain forced her to study human behavior carefully. She becomes spiritually sensitive because suffering pushed her closer to God. She becomes resilient because life repeatedly demanded courage from her. And eventually she reaches a place where she no longer fears starting over because she already proved to herself that she can survive rebuilding. Do not rush your healing just because others are uncomfortable with your process. Some wounds require time. Some betrayals cut deeply. Some forms of grief alter your entire perspective on life. Healing is not linear. There will be days when you feel powerful and days when old memories suddenly reopen hidden pain. That does not mean you are failing. It means you are human. One of the hardest truths to accept is that some people only loved the version of you they could control. The moment you began developing boundaries, they withdrew affection. The moment you began protecting your peace, they became offended. That revelation hurts because it exposes how conditional some relationships truly were. But exposure is sometimes mercy from God. Better painful truth than comforting illusion. You are not too much. You were simply poured into containers too small to honor your depth. People who lacked emotional maturity called your sensitivity weakness because they could not understand emotional depth. People who lacked integrity called your honesty difficult because truth unsettled them. People who benefited from manipulation called your boundaries selfish because your healing disrupted their control. There were seasons where you questioned whether God had forgotten you because the pain lasted longer than expected. But delay is not abandonment. Sometimes God allows isolation to separate you from dependency on human approval. Sometimes He removes distractions so you can hear your own soul clearly again. Sometimes He allows heartbreak to break unhealthy attachments that comfort was hiding from you. The woman rebuilding herself alone learns how to sit in silence without being consumed by it. At first, silence feels terrifying because it forces unresolved emotions to surface. But eventually, silence becomes sacred. It becomes the place where clarity returns. It becomes the place where God rebuilds confidence quietly. It becomes the place where a wounded woman remembers who she was before the world tried to convince her she was unworthy. Never underestimate the woman who had to heal herself without support. She knows how to survive disappointment creatively. She knows how to comfort herself through grief. She knows how to rebuild after collapse. She knows how to function while carrying invisible scars. And because she earned her strength through suffering, she no longer wastes energy proving herself to people committed to misunderstanding her. Some people will never apologize sincerely for what they did to you because acknowledging your pain would force them to confront their own behavior. Stop waiting for closure from people who lack accountability. Your healing cannot depend on another person's honesty. Sometimes closure comes from accepting that God saw everything even when others denied it. The strongest women are not always the loudest. Sometimes the strongest woman is the one quietly surviving another painful day without losing faith completely. Sometimes the strongest woman is the one choosing kindness after being mistreated repeatedly. Sometimes the strongest woman is the one rebuilding her confidence slowly after emotional abuse tried to erase her identity. There is a sacred kind of beauty that develops in women who survive suffering without becoming cruel. Their eyes carry wisdom. Their presence carries calm. Their words carry depth. You can feel the storms they survived without them, even speaking about it. Pain shaped them, but God preserved their spirit from destruction. The woman rebuilding herself alone eventually realizes she was never truly alone. God was present in every unseen battle. God was present during every sleepless night. God was present when betrayal shattered her trust. God was present when loneliness made her question her value. And even when she felt abandoned by people, heaven never abandoned her. You spend too much time mourning people who felt no guilt for hurting you. Enough. Stop building altars around your heartbreak. Stop replaying betrayal until it becomes your identity. Your story is bigger than your suffering. Your purpose is bigger than your pain. God did not preserve your life so you could remain emotionally imprisoned by people who already moved on from the damage they caused. Some women become addicted to fixing others because they secretly hope healing others will heal themselves. But you cannot save people determined to remain destructive. Stop sacrificing your emotional stability trying to rescue those who repeatedly wound you. Compassion without boundaries becomes self-destruction. The woman rebuilding herself alone becomes selective with access. Not because she hates people, because she finally understands the cost of giving her energy to the wrong ones. Peace became expensive after everything she survived. She no longer entertains chaos casually. She no longer ignores red flags to avoid loneliness. She no longer confuses attention with genuine care. God is teaching some of you how to stop shrinking yourself emotionally. You spent years minimizing your needs so others would stay comfortable. You tolerated disrespect because you feared abandonment. You accepted inconsistency because you doubted your worth. But healing changes your standards. Healing teaches you that love should not require self-erasure. There is a version of you emerging now that your past would not even recognize. A calmer version, a wiser version, a more discerning version. A version no longer desperate for approval. And some people will resent your growth because your transformation exposes their inability to evolve. Do not apologize for becoming harder to manipulate. Do not apologize for protecting your peace. Do not apologize for requiring honesty, consistency, and respect. Those are not impossible expectations. They are basic necessities for emotional safety. One day, the woman who cried alone in the dark will realize she became the woman others now look to for strength, not because she planned it, because survival transformed her. The wounds that once made her feel weak became sources of wisdom. The betrayals that once shattered her confidence became lessons in discernment. The loneliness that once terrified her taught her how to depend on God instead of unstable people. There is power in surviving what was meant to silence you. There is power in smiling again after emotional devastation. There is power in rebuilding your life after betrayal without becoming consumed by revenge. The world expected your pain to destroy you completely. Instead, God used it to reveal your endurance. You are entering a season where peace matters more than performance, where authenticity matters more than popularity, where spiritual clarity matters more than external validation. And because of that shift, certain relationships will naturally fall away. Let them. Not every connection is meant to continue into your healing. The woman rebuilding herself alone eventually stops asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and starts asking, "What is God teaching me through this?" That question changes everything. Because pain without purpose creates despair, but pain with purpose creates transformation. There were moments when you hated your sensitivity because it made heartbreak feel unbearable. But your sensitivity is not a curse. It is part of the depth God placed inside you. The goal is not to become emotionless. The goal is to become wise enough to protect your heart without hardening it completely. Some of you survived environments where you constantly felt emotionally unsafe. You had to monitor moods. You had to walk carefully around unstable behavior. You had to suppress your feelings to avoid conflict. That kind of survival mode changes the nervous system deeply. Be patient with yourself as you heal. Your exhaustion is not laziness. Your guardedness is not irrational. Your soul has been carrying weight for a long time. The strong woman who rebuilds herself alone eventually becomes impossible to deceive easily because suffering taught her to recognize patterns. She notices inconsistency quickly. She notices emotional manipulation quickly. She notices performative kindness quickly. Pain trained her perception. Do not confuse your healing with becoming unfeeling. Some people think strength means emotional numbness. No. Real strength is remaining soft-hearted in a hard world without allowing that softness to destroy you. Real strength is staying connected to God after disappointment tried to make you hopeless. You have survived enough to know that appearances mean nothing without character. Some of the kindest looking people carried the darkest intentions. Some of the loudest supporters secretly celebrated your struggles. Some of the people you trusted most became lessons instead of lifelong companions. Pain revealed truth that comfort was hiding. There is nothing weak about rebuilding your life from emotional rubble. That is sacred work. That is courageous work. Every day you chose to continue, despite exhaustion, was an act of resistance against despair. Every time you prayed through confusion was strength. Every time you refused to become bitter was victory. And now look at you, still standing, still breathing, still becoming. The woman they underestimated has survived things they know nothing about. The woman they abandoned learned how to rebuild without them. The woman they tried to break discovered that her strength was never coming from human approval in the first place. God carried her through the fire, and now there's something in her spirit that no betrayal can destroy, no accusation can erase, and no abandonment can silence again. And there is another truth the strong woman must face, even when it hurts to admit it. Sometimes, the deepest grief is not about losing other people. Sometimes the deepest grief is realizing how long you abandoned yourself trying to keep other people from leaving. You ignored your intuition. You silenced your needs. You accepted half-hearted love because you feared complete loneliness. You kept giving chances to people who kept giving wounds. And one day, your soul became exhausted from carrying relationships that God never designed you to carry alone. That exhaustion was not weakness. It was your spirit begging you to stop betraying yourself for the comfort of others. Some women were taught that being good meant enduring everything silently. They were praised for sacrificing themselves until nothing remained. Praised for tolerating disrespect. Praised for staying quiet while emotionally bleeding. But God did not create you to disappear inside other people's dysfunction. You were not created to become a resting place for chaos. You were not created to carry everybody while nobody carried you. The strong woman who rebuilds herself alone eventually understands that self-respect is not pride. Walking away from what destroys your peace is not cruelty. Protecting your spirit is wisdom. There are scars inside you that nobody clapped for you while you healed. Nobody celebrated the nights you resisted breaking down completely. Nobody saw the mornings when you forced yourself out of bed after crying for hours. Nobody understood how much courage it took for you to smile while carrying disappointment heavy enough to crush your confidence. People see survival after it becomes visible. They rarely honor the invisible fight required to get there. But God saw every hidden battle, every trembling prayer, every moment you almost gave up emotionally but kept moving anyway. And now your soul is changing in ways even you do not fully understand yet. You are no longer attracted to noise. You are no longer desperate for attention. You no longer crave constant validation because suffering taught you how temporary human approval really is. You are beginning to value peace over popularity, honesty over charm, depth over appearances. And because of that transformation, some people no longer recognize you. The old version of you was easier to access, easier to manipulate, easier to guilt, easier to control through emotional inconsistency. But the woman God is rebuilding now listens to discernment more than pressure. You know what is remarkable about a woman who rebuilt herself alone? She becomes deeply compassionate without becoming foolish. That balance is rare. She knows pain personally, so she treats others gently. But she also knows manipulation personally, so she no longer ignores warning signs. She learns how to love without losing herself. She learns how to care without abandoning wisdom. And that balance comes at a cost. It was purchased through betrayal, disappointment, loneliness, and countless nights of self-reflection. There were seasons where you kept asking God why certain people were allowed to hurt you so deeply. But now you are beginning to understand something painful and powerful at the same time. Some people entered your life to reveal what needed healing inside you. They exposed wounds you had ignored. They exposed fears you had buried. They exposed how much of your worth was attached to being chosen by others. And though their actions hurt you deeply, God used even that pain to awaken you spiritually. The woman rebuilding herself alone eventually stops chasing closure because she realizes closure is not always a conversation. Sometimes closure is distance. Sometimes closure is silence. Sometimes closure is accepting that not everybody has the emotional maturity to admit the damage they caused. And instead of wasting years begging for accountability from people committed to denial, she places her pain before God and keeps moving forward with dignity. Some of you are grieving people who are still alive. That is a different kind of heartbreak. Watching someone emotionally disappear while physically remaining present can destroy a person slowly. Being misunderstood by people you once trusted creates a loneliness words cannot fully describe. But hear this clearly. God can rebuild a heart that humans mishandled. God can restore identity after emotional confusion. God can breathe strength into parts of you that became tired from carrying disappointment too long. The strong woman who rebuilds herself alone eventually becomes emotionally fluent in silence. She can hear what people refuse to say. She can feel insincerity beneath polite words. She can recognize when energy shifts. Pain sharpened her awareness. That is why she no longer ignores discomfort to keep relationships alive. Her spirit has already paid too high a price for ignoring truth. Some people thought your isolation would weaken you. They assumed loneliness would break your confidence permanently. But isolation became your training ground. In silence, you discovered your endurance. In solitude, you discovered your relationship with God was deeper than you realized. In heartbreak, you discovered your spirit could survive far more than you imagined. And now the same woman who once begged for emotional crumbs is becoming a woman who walks away from disrespect without hesitation. There is a holy kind of anger rising inside many women right now. Not bitterness, not hatred, clarity. The kind of clarity that comes after years of tolerating emotional neglect. The kind of clarity that says, I will never again shrink myself to fit inside relationships that suffocate my spirit. That awakening changes everything. Because once a woman understands her worth before God, manipulation begins losing its power over her. You are not hard to love. You are simply surrounded by people who only understood convenience, not commitment. People who enjoyed your loyalty but could not return consistency. People who loved access to your heart while refusing responsibility for how they handled it. Stop measuring your worth by the emotional limitations of broken people. There is also grief in becoming stronger, because stronger people often receive less comfort. The world assumes resilient women do not need support because they appear capable. But even the strongest souls become tired sometimes. Even the strongest women need reassurance. Even the strongest hearts need gentleness. Do not become so independent that you convince yourself your pain does not matter. God never asked you to become emotionally numb. He asked you to remain faithful while healing. The The woman rebuilding herself alone eventually understands that peace is a form of wealth, not material wealth, spiritual wealth, emotional wealth, mental wealth. There are people with full calendars and empty souls. There are people constantly surrounded by attention while internally miserable. But the woman who fought for her peace values calm differently because she remembers what emotional chaos cost her. One day you will stop romanticizing people who only loved fragments of you. You will stop mourning connections that survived only because you carried them alone emotionally. You will stop questioning whether you were enough for people who were never capable of appreciating depth in the first place. And when that day fully arrives, your spirit will breathe differently, lighter, freer, stronger. God is not only healing your pain, He is rebuilding your identity. For too long, your self-worth was shaped by rejection, betrayal, inconsistency, and abandonment. But your identity does not belong to the people who hurt you. Your value does not decrease because someone failed to recognize it. Diamonds remain valuable even when buried in dirt. There is a reason you no longer feel comfortable entertaining shallow relationships. Your soul has outgrown superficiality. After surviving emotional devastation, surface-level connections feel empty. You crave truth now, stability now, sincerity now. Your standards change because suffering matured you. The strong woman who rebuilds herself alone becomes a living contradiction to everything that tried to destroy her. Betrayal tried to make her distrust everyone permanently, but she still carries compassion. Heartbreak tried to make her emotionally shut down, but she still believes in genuine connection. Isolation tried to convince her she was forgotten, but she still speaks to God with faith. That resilience is sacred. And hear this carefully before you forget it again. Your softness was never your weakness. Your loyalty was never your weakness. Your deep heart was never your weakness. The real danger came from placing those gifts into careless hands. Never punish yourself for being genuine in a world filled with masks. God sees the purity people took advantage of. God sees the love you gave sincerely. God sees the battles you fought silently. And the woman emerging from this season will not merely survive her past. She will walk with a depth, wisdom, peace, and spiritual strength that only God could build through the fire she endured alone.